Doctor, I can't hear anything. Any problem?
Break.
Break is on.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back to the class again. Let's continue our study in book of Romans. Book of Romans, chapters 12 to 15. The righteousness of God reflected by believers. That's the theme that we see in the final phase of this letter. The righteousness of God reflected by believers. Chapter 1 to 11, Apostle Paul has discussed a lot of theology to the cognitive minds of the individual so that right theology can be formed. And now, chapter 12 onwards, he talks about a practical Christian life. The righteousness of God is to be reflected. What is the goal of salvation that we discussed? Friends, what is the goal of salvation? Daniel?
Anna, can you tell it again?
What is the goal of salvation that is mentioned in this book of Romans? We have been discussing now.
Goal of salvation, going to heaven.
Going to heaven?
So
Okay.
become...
Okay, yes, Hubert?
The righteousness of God.
The goal of salvation is the righteousness of God. What is the goal of salvation? It's righteousness. And now, that's what Paul discussed in chapter 1 to 11. The goal of salvation is the righteousness of God. And now the righteousness of God reflected by the believers. The goal of salvation, if the goal of the salvation is righteousness of God, that righteousness of God should be reflected by the believer in the society, day by day lifestyle. That righteousness of God should be reflected like a tube light through the believers. The righteousness of God is to be reflected partially and impartially in his children, perfectly or imperfectly, partially or imperfectly in his children. The righteousness of God is to be reflected through you and me. If that righteousness of God is not reflecting through an individual, the individual is not fulfilling the goal of righteousness, goal of salvation. The goal of salvation is the righteousness of God. That's what argumentative discussions can be seen in this book. The broad forms which this righteousness should take are outlined by Paul in chapter 12 to 15. Rather than presenting animals and other items as a sacrifice, we are to present ourselves. That's what chapter 12 verse 1 talk about. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. That's what text says. Rather than presenting animals and other items as a sacrifice, we are to present ourselves. Religion always teaches people to offer something. Take something to God and offer. Offer your prayers, your money, your tithes, your oaths. Of course, they are essential. But Paul here says, if the goal of salvation is the righteousness of God, if that righteousness of God needs to be reflected through an individual, what we need to do? We have to present ourselves as a living sacrifice. We are to serve God by setting aside those attitudes and practices of the world in which we live, and to be renewed in our minds with the knowledge of that which is the will of God, which is both good and pleasing to him. Pleasing to him. When an individual offers himself as a living sacrifice, the scriptures, then he will be able to know what God's will is. With good, pleasing, and perfect will. God's will always fulfills three things. It's good, pleasing, and perfect will. Sometimes it may be good, but it may not be perfect will of God. Sometimes it may be pleasing to your eye. It may not be good for you. But if it is a God's will, the three components will be that it's good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. And now, the first area of sacrificial service is in using the spiritual gifts which God has given us for service. Some people say, hey, I sacrifice myself. That's fine. But God demands that our talents and the gifts should be used for the glory of God. Every gift is to be employed in a way that will serve God and benefit others. That serve God and benefit others. Chapter 12 ends with more general principles which are to guide us in our conduct and in our relationship with others. Rita, గొట్టు పడుతుంది నాన్న, ఆపేస్తావు కొద్దిగా. Chapter 12 ends with more general principles which are to guide us in our conduct and in our relationship with others, our character and our relationship. They both speak the volumes of the righteousness of God through our lives. If the goal of the salvation is the righteousness of God, that righteousness of God need to be reflected through an individual's life and the character. How it happens? It happens through the conduct, the character, and the relationship with others. Both are important. Some people are very good, they have a great conduct, but very poor in relationships. Some people are experts in relationships. They're so they know they will never have any problem. Very gentle people, they are excellent in relationship, but their conduct is very, very bad. Conduct and relationships, both should go hand in hand. That's what Paul says here in chapter 13. Paul turns to the Christians' practical righteousness in relationship to the government which God has placed in authority over him. This is very, very essential for the followers of Christ to know that followers of Christ, practical righteousness in relationship to the government which God has placed in authority over him or her. Today, Modi government in India, the BJP government, it hasn't come to power by itself. It is the sovereign God of the heaven has approved it. It didn't happen without the knowledge of God. So what is our responsibility? We should trust God and be faithful in our day-to-day activities with the government. We should obey the government. Only if the government is pressurizing us to get into a wrong theology and also it is coming in between God and individual, then he has a very chance to reject and violate the rules. But in all other matters, we should be faithful citizens of India, and we should continue to cooperate with the government. Paying taxes and following the laws of the land are very essential to the followers of Christians, the followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, whom we call Christians. The followers of Christ are to regard the authority of government as having come from God. That's what I'm saying. Today, you and I need to believe and understand the Modi government today in India has come from the God of the heaven, the Lord Jesus. And thus one should obey government as unto the Lord unless there are very exceptional circumstances. There may be some exceptional circumstances. Till then we need to obey. We should be faithful citizens of India. And we should continue to cooperate with the government. Paul lays down principles for relating to one another as Christians when we see things differently based upon our maturity or upon different convictions. We are not to exercise our rights in ways that would cause another to stumble. It may be right, but we should not keep on fighting for that right. What happens if we keep on fighting for that right? The weak brethren may fall apart. We are to strive to strengthen others. We are to strive to strengthen others, not to hinder them. We are to use our strength to serve the weak rather than to benefit ourselves. In chapter 15, Paul chooses in much the same way he began in this episode. Christians are to accept one another and not fall into disunity and divisions if God shows no partiality. Then we too must avoid racial prejudice and tensions. Racial prejudice and tensions. Of course, we are well ahead today. Let me allow you to talk. Friends, let's talk something about what is racial prejudice. What is racial prejudice and tensions? Do we have those racial prejudice and tensions in the Indian church today here? Maybe the church in Hyderabad, the Pune. What is racial prejudice?
Seeing their race by then judging the people.
What is race all about?
Means the locality, the place from where they came, the origin.
That's a region. That is a regional feeling. What is the race?
Like Germans, Indians, like that race.
No, okay. Germans, Indians, okay. What is racism? Do we have a racial prejudice in India? Yes, brother, Dr. Joseph Garu, and then Srinivas Devarakonda also joined today. Any one of you, please, let's talk something. I think Srinivas Devarakonda, if you are free to talk, you can help us. You are right there in Africa. A lot of racial discriminations happened there. Even Brother Smiles had a great knowledge about it in Africa, about Africa. Anyone want to contribute something?
Yes.
In US, it has happened, and black people are oppressed by white people. Even that is one of the race.
Okay.
That is in America mostly.
Now, what about our Indian context?
Yes, here also between the states there are issues. Sometimes, I mean, there was a problem with Peter had a problem with the Jews and the Gentiles when Paul corrected him. That is one reference there. But over here in India also we have racial problems. Like over here, Maharashtrians, people from Maharashtra, they will try to gather together, and other people from other states, they might have a problem with them that way.
Anyone else? But Smiles, you want to talk something?
Not much. I think what Hubert has already mentioned it. But this disunity and divisiveness is something I just wanted to, bring up. This is going up. It is increasing now. If you see it, more and more churches, not only in India but worldwide, there is more divisiveness and there's more disunity that it is coming up now. Paul, as an apostle, as a person who has directly spoken to God, Jesus Christ, probably had the vision to put this warning well in advance.
Yeah, you are right. Mhm.
Racism is basically two category of people. One feel that they are superior from the other category of people. It may depend or it may vary from different countries or different places, but basically that is the basic thing. So if you see in India also, we feel that some parts, as our brother Hobart mentioned, that Maharashtrians, they may have feeling that yes, we are the better people than other people in India. Even if you go inside deep into, then it is also reflect casteism also is one of the racism. Casteism is also we are seeing. And in foreign nations like America, in Africa also, it is between blacks and whites normally. And racism also between rich people and also poor people. That means one category of people purely 100% they feel that we are superior than the other category of people.
Yes, Srinivas, Devarakonda, you brought the exact point here. We discussed about this cultural aggressiveness in our gospel and culture. And
Dr. Garu,
yes,
I have a small question. In one of the slides earlier, you have mentioned that God was impartial to all people, but he has shown some preference to the Jews, is the word that you used in one of the slides. So I was just trying to wonder, was it not, could it not be treated as a partiality? I mean, I'm not accusing God, I'm just trying to clarify myself. I'm sorry for using wrong words.
No. You are right. See, let me go back to those slides. Thank you for bringing it. Okay. Okay. I think what you brought to our notice is exactly true. We all have that question. The word that used, God has showed some mercy to some group, not on the basis of their righteousness. God is just in judging some sinners, and he is both merciful and just in saving and blessing other sinners. God is just in saving and rejecting both Jews and the Gentiles, so that he shows no partiality. And it looks like a very, once it's logical and again it's illogical. Yeah, it looks like, there is a controversy in this philosophical statements, but if we really understand the biblical principle, God shows no partiality, 100% no partiality. But why this kind of election? If God is there is no partiality in God, why he elected only some? That's a question. Keep on it rings. I tried my best to help you to understand. So here, to have the choice, rest only with God is the only basis on which God's blessings and cursings could be righteously imparted. And God righteously, he distributed his blessing on both. Men will be blessed on the basis of the righteousness of Christ, not on the basis of their own works. Even in the Old Testament also, it is they have foreseen Christ, the Messiah, coming and redeeming them. And at one point we say it is not the righteousness of people that help them to come into that fold of election, but it looks like righteousness of the people. No, not at all. God impartially elected. The basis of this choice is crucial, for the righteousness of God is at issue here.
Thank you, Dr.
Now, how is it? Yes, your question still, I think I have not answered. It is really a struggle. When we go to heaven, then only we understand. But Paul tried to give a kind of logical answer here in chapter 9 and 10, saying that in Romans 9, Paul tells us that God chooses those whom he will bless. It looks like there is some kind of partiality. And those who will continue on the path to their own judgment. But here the logic, the basis of this choice is crucial. What is the basis of this choice? For the righteousness of God is at issue here.
Brother, hello.
Yes,
Brother.
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, brother, there is chapter 4, Jonah, that in that also God mentioned that there are this many people and how I can destroy them. Like that, one example is given there also. You can see the God's mercy.
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah. See, different theologians try to help this election and his mercy in a more logical way. But here I wanted to conclude saying that there are many theologians, they say, no, God, because God is sovereign and he present, past and future are everything same because we are bound by time, but God is beyond time and space. So in that foreknowledge, the election happened. That's all. So anyway, you keep on struggle. If you are really disturbed, it means that you are on track. Don't worry about it. Now, chapter 15, Paul closes in much the same way he began this epistle. Christians are to accept one another and not fall into disunity and divisions. If God shows no partiality, then we too must avoid racial prejudice and tensions. As the scene was brought rightly, there is much caste-based discrimination in India and also caste-based discrimination in the Christian community. Caste-based tensions and all these race-based tensions, particularly in the mission context, mission leaders context, there is a racial prejudice. Nadar, Tamil community, or maybe Telugu community, Malayali community, racial tensions are very much, I have seen. Only Brother Smiles brought the right observation saying that more disunity is happening in these days. There is a lot of, so much word has been proclaimed, but in the midst of so much preaching, there is so much division. And some people comfort themselves saying that the more division, the more church growth. Praise God. And I don't accept that. God never intended that. And now, Paul's postscript in chapter 16 of this book of Romans is primarily Paul's closing of this letter with personal words of greeting and with final words of exhortation. Personal words of greeting and final words of exhortation can be seen in this chapter 16. While Paul may not yet have reached Rome, he knew of many of the saints there by name. His concern for the saints in this city was far from minimal. Why is the gospel so important? The gospel is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. And in the gospel of righteousness from God is revealed. That's what we have discussed in Romans chapter 1. Fact to consider in this book of Romans. Romans is God-centered. The book of Romans is God-centered. It is God who is to be central and preeminent, not men. It is he who ought to orient our lives to him. I would like to suggest that the righteousness of God is that attribute to God's character which makes his other attributes, all the more glorious. The entire chapter the book talks about the righteousness of God. The goal of our salvation is the righteousness of God. That righteousness of God should be reflected through the believer's life. Two things, two prominent themes in this book. The goal of salvation is the righteousness of God. The goal of salvation is not simply going to heaven. Of course, we are already in heaven. The moment an individual accepts Jesus, he is placed in the heavenly kingdom. His names are written in the book of life, no doubt about it. But we should not simply, look at that heaven and, oh, I am going to heaven. The goal of salvation is the righteousness of God. That righteousness of God should be reflected through an individual's life in society, to the government, to the believer, to have the unity with the unbelievers around, with the believers in the church, and with the government out there, to everybody. The righteousness of God should be reflected. That's the end of the book teaching. Let's meet in our next class tomorrow, Friday, 10th